Thank you. I want to thank the Cultural Landscape Foundation and its board for bringing this event to the Triangle this year. This area typically doesn't attract a lot of attention for its design, so it's a big deal for us around here to have all you here today. So thanks to you as well. Unlike Kofi, I'm probably the most local person you're going to hear from today. My family's roots date back to like the early 1700s, and I've been pretty much in this area my whole life. I was born about an hour west of Durham, where I live now, and I moved to Chapel Hill to attend UNC as an undergrad. And except for a couple years away when I worked for the Central Park Conservancy in New York, I have lived in this area, and for the past 18 years, I have been the University Landscape Architect at Duke. So it's an honor to set the stage for this illustrious panel that's going to be talking about campuses. Campuses are never the sexiest topic at landscape architecture things, but I do believe the campus as a typology has been kind of rooted in our profession since the beginning. And I would argue that it is the single most important cultural landscape in this region. The term campus is derived from the Latin word for field, which was first used in this country to describe the landscape at Princeton. However, as we all know, campuses are a lot about more than just the land. You need buildings and other elements that shape space and accommodate program. All sorts of institutional properties are called or call themselves campuses, but what it really comes down to is creating compositions of open space and built form that provide the setting for unified communities to work, live, and/or learn. The Triangle is best known for its higher education campuses, which have a particularly rich history and have come to represent physical embodiments of the region's idealized past and optimistic future. Here on this, you see the big three universities, the HBCUs that Kofi talked about, and then the women's colleges. UNC was the first state university in the country to open its doors to students, and like most other colonial-era universities, grew slowly and incrementally in its early years. By the late 18th century, an American version of the campus was emerging, one that looked backward toward the English model of creating communities of living and learning, but also with an added New World parameter that provided a seemingly endless amount of land upon which to build and expand. McCorkle Place is UNC's original campus, a quadrangle built as an open lawn dotted with large canopy trees and surrounded by a loosely formal arrangement of modest buildings tucked into shallow slopes. I lived on this quad when I was a freshman, so when I claim that this is one of the greatest campus spaces in the country, I do so with equal parts professional experience and a personal history laced with nostalgia. It is a simple yet brilliant landscape of lawn and trees that proves without a doubt that there is power in subtlety. A decision made long ago to disturb the native topography and soil as little as possible during construction has enabled generations of trees to thrive while creating the gentle up and down cadence one experienced along the walkways that makes the space feel completely appropriate and of the place. In the 1920s, the architecture firm McKim, Mead & White was hired to design a new quad called Polk Place, a more refined, albeit less interesting, version of McCorkle, which it mirrors as it drapes across the bisecting ridgeline, falling away onto the slope to the south and setting up the next century of expansion. The space reflects the Beaux-Arts era, with a uniform architectural style and a formal arrangement of trees and walkways. Combined, Polk and McCorkle form the historic core of the campus. The school produced a study for preserving and enhancing the landscape of trees in these legacy spaces in 2008 called The Dignity of Restraint. The plan was led by the late and wonderful Peter Shout with an expert team that included Jim Urban, Mike Durr, Charles Birnbaum, and my counterpart at UNC, Jill Coleman. On to North Carolina State, our host today, as Chuck said, was founded in 1887 as part of the early land grant institutions, and it was created to serve a more democratic population of students in the state that UNC was not meeting at the time. It was built on a far more constrained site than that of UNC, on a piece of land straddled by a railroad line to one side and a major city street the other. A tight wedge of land punctuated by a bell tower that remains a symbol and focal point for the university. This early imagery shows the intent for a campus designed around open spaces, but rapid post-war expansion occurred in a haphazard manner that tracked the patterns of the automobile far more than those of the pedestrian, and created a confusing environment lacking the order and traditional expectations of beauty found on more celebrated campuses. We are taught that legibility is an important element for successful campuses, and that is largely true. But part of the charm of State's campus is actually its lack of coherence. In recent years, the landscape has been organized around the concept of an all-campus path that ties everything together. But for me, the campus is best appreciated as a collection of spaces experienced sequentially along the path of one's own making, taking advantage of numerous shortcuts and detours that maneuver past a series of landscapes, both intimate and grand. The campus's two iconic open spaces are the historic core of North Carolina, an open bowl of lawn framed by trees that expresses a fresh take on the traditional quadrangle, and University Plaza, a modernist field of patterned brick designed by Dick Bell that slides past open lawns, mature trees, and oversized buildings. It is an intriguing space and one that does not get the love it deserves from the design community. I will say, however, that the space made more sense before the university demolished Harrelson Hall, a mid-century barrel of a building that was fairly ridiculous as practical academic architecture, and surely obsolete, but as an element in the landscape, was a striking period piece that helped to anchor the otherwise rambling space. The amateur critic in me won't let me not comment on Centennial Campus and the Oval where we are today. The things that I appreciate so much about State's main campus, its human scale, moments of surprise, focus on horticulture, and creative placemaking, are the precise things that are missing here, which is an uncomfortably proportioned space that, as a planning gesture, conveys a basic lack of imagination, symptomatic of the era in which it was conceived, when derivation and pattern making were standard practice in campus design, and the broader profession of landscape architecture had yet been re-energized with a confidence and standing to drive more creative solutions. Now over to Durham and to Duke, which was founded in 1924 as one of the country's so-called robber baron universities, in recognition of a $40 million trust set up by the tobacco magnate James Buchanan Duke to establish his legacy of improving health care and education in the state. The Olmsted Brothers firm, led by partner Percival Gallagher, was hired to design the landscape surrounding the Georgian buildings on the Jefferson-inspired East Campus, and in a much larger role, to lay out and design the expansive Collegiate Gothic West Campus, for which over 5,000 acres of abandoned farmland and woodlands had been purchased, as well as the mile-long drive that connects the two campuses. West Campus is particularly interesting in the way its design highlights a period of time when the picturesque era collided with the Beaux-Arts and ultimately lost out. Early Olmsted plans express a loose and naturalistic vision for the campus, with a landscape of lush woods, lakes, and romantic era features. An array of stone buildings is shown spread across the bending ridgeline, fitting into the rolling hills in a manner that preserves the integrity of the Piedmont landscape, while creating patterns of expansion that could be logically followed moving forward. When funds ran low, however, a trimmed-down version was put forth by the Horace Trumbauer architecture firm, and its chief designer, Julian Abel, a devotee of the Beaux-Arts, who envisioned a more architectonic and regimented cross-axial campus that eventually got built. Rather than adapting to the land as the Olmsted firm had suggested, the new scheme bulldozed the craggy ridge and rebuilt it as a simplified landform that expresses man's dominion over the natural world. All three of these universities have grown exponentially away from their historic cores and now function like small cities, larger and more complex than many towns across the state. They are among the largest employers and landowners in the region. The 7,000-acre Duke Forest, NC State's 245-acre Schenck Forest, and the 750 acres of woodlands at UNC's Carolina North are all significant natural resources that not only support the education and research missions for the schools, but also provide land for community recreation, ecosystem services, wildlife refuge, and natural buffer against the never-ending development. Another important player in this regard is the Research Triangle Park, which we've heard about before. It was developed to maximize the intellectual and economic capital generated by the local universities. Initially built on 4,400 acres, the campus has grown to nearly 7,000 today. So hindsight encourages us to scoff at the suburban mindset that created the park system of introverted facilities built like private estates, strung along winding parkways and served by oceans of asphalt parking lots. But the concept of a development within the woods is actually sound and rooted in an environmental ethic that mandates the preservation of certain natural areas across the campus. As with the woodlands that are managed by the universities, the park has become an institutionalized curator of the region's disappearing forest character. We will see how long that lasts moving forward. The incredible success of RTP has had a dramatic impact on both the economy and demographics of the region. Before the park's rapid growth in the 70s, as the local economy sat stagnant with a dependence on outdated industries, graduates from Big Three universities often fled the area for better opportunities elsewhere, creating a brain drain in the region. Over time, as more contemporary fields emerged within RTP, highly educated people moved in droves, quickly changing the population dynamics in ways that produced a dramatic urban bubble within the largely rural and conservative state, a precursor to evolving national trends. People flooded the region, gradually engulfing once sleepy microtowns like Cary, Apex, and Holly Springs, and turning them into sprawling models of all things suburban. The defining lines separating the Triangle cities were quickly being lost as planned communities replaced farms, and once vast woodlands were razed at an accelerating pace. Between 2002 and 2007 alone, while the real estate boom was at its craziest, North Carolina lost more than 600,000 acres of farmland. As traditional agriculture became less viable, selling to developers was often the only option for farmers and their families. It is worth noting, as has been mentioned before, the profession of landscape architecture was a major beneficiary of this shift in land use. Development jobs were bread and butter work for firms for decades. Apart from the business of sprawl, landscape architects in the region specialized in the work that clients were hiring for. This included parks, greenways, K-12 schools, universities, and other institutional projects, with little of it being recognized outside of the region. True urban work was pretty non-existent in the Triangle at the time, as downtowns were still basically ignored. All of this began to change on a large scale in the early 2000s, when Durham turned inward and began to repurpose a series of abandoned tobacco warehouses on property that had been home to the Duke family's American Tobacco Company. By the turn of the century, a dozen years after Hollywood put Durham on the map, its downtown remained essentially empty. The residents of other Triangle communities avoided the city, scared off by its exaggerated and racially motivated reputation for being dangerous. Many people who worked in Durham, at Duke and in RTP, which sits in Durham, most of which sits in Durham County, chose to live elsewhere. But those of us who loved the city and happily chose to live in central neighborhoods long before doing so was regarded by others as a cool or even safe thing to do, took pride in its gritty character, quirky counterculture vibe, and open arms attitude that continues to celebrate diversity in all its forms. Duke remained a highly sought-after school, despite Durham's negative image, but administrators fully understood that a successful downtown would be a boon for both the city and the university, and agreed to lease thousands of square feet of space in American Tobacco to help ensure its success. The site was ambitiously reimagined as a 19-acre urban campus that became the antithesis of the sprawling RTP. The project succeeded on a large scale and kickstarted a $1.2 billion resurgence in a downtown precinct that now attracts hipsters, families, entrepreneurs, food writers, and legitimate fears of displacement from gentrification. Duke remains a critical tenant for all of these new develops, including the Innovation District. Most of these developers now are bringing with them a generic placeless brand of architecture that is threatening Duke's eclectic industrial charm that has made it so special. So during the time of the American Tobacco Project was underway, NC State, UNC, and Duke were all in active expansion mode. UNC even published a book about all it accomplished between 2001 and 2011. Since I started at Duke in 2000, the university's footprint has grown by 35%, and the campus has added 110 acres of newly designed landscapes. We have a long history of hiring architects who bring prestige and expertise to the design of campus buildings with various degrees of success, regardless of proposed fee or where their firm is located. In contrast to that, before 2000, most landscape architecture had been done by local firms, with exceptions being Laurie Olin and Dennis McGlade, who worked on a new business school during the early days of Hannah Olin, and a large project by Carroll Johnson Associates in the mid-1990s. In 97, now as part of the Olin partnership, Laurie produced a plan that proposed targeted landscape-based strategies to tie together the campus, which had evolved rapidly and carelessly since the 1950s, with no perceptible patterns aside from moving cars around efficiently and providing parking for faculty as close to their buildings as possible. There was never any funding attached to this plan, but it did help inform future planning efforts. It was important to me when I started at Duke that we expand our criteria and our boundaries for hiring landscape architects to be more in line with the way we picked architects. Our landscapes were becoming more complex, and sustainability was quickly and dramatically changing the way we design. So I wanted to work with landscape architects who could bring both a needed expertise and a strong voice for the landscape on par with that enjoyed by the buildings. These are only some of the firms I have worked with, and I know there are many people in this room that have worked at Duke. But I want to put these up because I think these highlight having the presence of these firms, even if it didn't always lead to built projects, has helped to raise the bar for design not only at Duke, but across the region. Certainly other local campuses have hired national firms, but what separates Duke, in my biased opinion, is the number and variety of landscapes we have actually built. These recent projects include over a dozen years of collaboration with Laurie, who helped to create major campus open spaces and has added welcome gravitas and support for me in landscape-related discussions. As you'll hear from Gary, he has been working extensively at Duke for over a decade now, along with Eric Kramer, who became a partner at Reed Hildebrand during this time and has been integral to the firm's significant, and I'm happy to say, award-winning work. Michael Ferguson, Warren Bird, and Glenn Allen, who I still miss, have also worked with me on multiple projects. All of these relationships began as professional collaborations and have evolved into friendships that are very important to me. And I now look forward to a long and productive collaboration with Adrian on the project he is going to talk about. It goes without saying that these designers have taught me a great deal, and I can only hope that I have taught them something along the way as well. This list of collaborators would be incomplete if I didn't mention Walt Havner, who has done more work with me at Duke than anyone else, and who has also left the most significant legacy on the region's contemporary cultural landscape. I can also say that without a doubt his firm has gotten exponentially better, due in part to the exposure to and competition from these national firms. When his project at the museum won an ASLA award for design, it was important to all of us around here, as was the fact it was featured on the cover of Landscape Architecture magazine. Through Dan Gottlieb's leadership, stay tuned on that, the museum has redefined design excellence across the state. The beautiful way in which water is managed on the campus, for instance, adds to the region's existing status as a leader in the design and education of innovative stormwater solutions. NC State's restoration of Rocky Branch Creek in the early 2000s set a high bar for quality, both regionally and nationally. The way in which it incorporates pedagogy into responsible environmental stewardship makes it one of the best case studies for urban stormwater management that you will find anywhere. UNC has been a leader as well, starting with an exceptional stormwater master plan done in collaboration with Andrew Pogon Associates, and then with subsequent built work such as this restoration adjacent to a historic dorm done with biohabitats. The school exemplifies how an institutional commitment to environmental sustainability can be effectively implemented. Back at Duke, just one more time, this project began as a fenced-off, rip-wrapped retention pond, engineered to reduce the university's need for potable water by over 100 million gallons per year. I was fortunately able to convince administrators to invest in this as a fully realized work of landscape architecture, rather than merely an engineered structure as had been planned. Nelson Bird-Woltz led the design of what began as an approximately $4 million utility and became this beautiful, didactic, and functional landscape that ultimately cost 3 times that much. I'm going to wrap this up on my soapbox in a bit of a digression, so bear with me. Campus landscapes are never just about aesthetics or ecology, even though we like talking about those aspects. Like all cultural landscapes, their value comes with the people who use them. Exposing students to places such as this, along with gardens, quadrangles, plazas, and other spaces, inevitably affects the way they see and experience the world. Instilling in them the appreciation for the design landscape at this stage of their lives can only be a good thing, and is an example of the responsibility we have as landscape architects. It took me a while to realize it, but I know now without a doubt that I'm a landscape architect today because of the relationship I developed with the campus while at UNC, the first place away from my family that I considered home. That I'm a university landscape architect is not some happy accident. We set our own paths, whether consciously or subconsciously, and mine led me here. Neither is it a coincidence that most of my writing over the years has been about cultural and public landscapes, promoting the work that people like Dan at the museum, Jill at UNC, my friend and counterpart here at NC State, Tom Skolnicki, my former boss at Central Park, Chris Nolan, Christian Zimmerman at Prospect Park Alliance, Michael Boland at Presidio Trust, Mary Hughes at UVA, and I, among others, do. Whether for a famous place or not, this is important work that is thankfully championed by the Cultural Landscape Foundation, yet still largely undervalued by the rest of our profession, which tends to be captivated by shinier things. We can all agree that design is fun, and getting things right in the beginning is of course important. But landscapes by their nature evolve in unpredictable ways, something particularly true for campuses. And the more they age, the more they inevitably benefit from ongoing focus of people who can effectively prioritize and facilitate responsible change. I believe strongly that landscape stewardship, both as ethos and practice, needs to become embedded into the curricula of landscape architecture programs. We need to inspire smart and talented designers, and yes, this is design, and thinkers to become actively engaged in ensuring the ongoing relevance and quality of historic and cultural landscapes in ways that preserve and enhance their integrity, purpose, and beauty. Thank you.